Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Fulham Podcast, brought to you by the Global Sports Podcast Network, which brings you daily content and coverage on all 20 Premier League sides, as well as providing a podcast dedicated to women's football. My name is Gavin Ruffle, your host as always, and after triumph in the FA Cup last weekend, where Fulham created a bit of history, beating Manchester United in that competition for the first time in 117 years. Well, this weekend, there's another piece of history they could make, and that's by winning 4 consecutive league games, Premier League games, away from home. They've never achieved that before. And it just highlights how good Fulham's form away from home has been this season. We know they've had some struggles, some difficulties at Craven Cottage, but generally speaking, away form has been good, has been consistent. Performances have been pretty good, and that's illustrated by the fact that a win on the weekend would be their seventh win away from home in the Premier League. And you compare that to last season, they only managed 4 in the entirety of that campaign. It won't be an easy task, however, as they do come up against an informed Brighton side, and there's hardly anything to separate the sides if you look at the league table. Just 1 place and 1 point. Brighton come into the weekend's game 8th on 43 points, with Fulham a place behind them on 42 points. And they are 2 teams that form a very congested top half, with 6 points separating Nottingham Forest in 3rd and Aston Villa in 10th. So every single one of those clubs will have their eyes set on Europe. And how many places that will go down to, we don't know at this stage, do we? Could it be 7? Could it be 8? And you wonder if some of those sides, likes of Brighton, Bournemouth, Fulham, they would have had a keen eye on what had gone on in midweek with those teams involved in Champions League action, because we know the better the teams in Europe do, the teams from England do in Europe this season, there is that extra likelihood of another place for the Champions League next season. So ordinarily, fans of those clubs wouldn't be too bothered about some of the English teams and what they're doing. A lot of the time, they probably want them to get knocked out, but in this instance, they probably want them to go as far as they can. So seeing Aston Villa, Arsenal and Liverpool get wins away from home in contrasting styles, you could say. Certainly the Arsenal victory and the Liverpool victory, but wins all the same. And yeah, I'm sure those sides would have been quite happy with that, because if we could get 3 teams from England in the quarterfinals and in the Champions League, then there's every chance we're going to get 5 teams in the Champions League for next season. I saw something on social media in midweek from Sky Sports News where Michael Dawson was asked the question about Nottingham Forest. We know Nottingham Forest are going well in the league. As I said, 3rd at the moment. They're in the FA Cup. And the question was posed to him, what would Forest prefer? Champions League qualification, finishing in the top 4, or winning silverware, winning the FA Cup? And bit dumbfounded by a question like that, because I just think, why can't you achieve both? Why does one have to come at the expense of the other? We're at the nitty-gritty stage of the season now, when there's a number of clubs in a similar sort of position that will have their eyes set on European qualification and potentially winning a piece of major silverware for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. And if you're fans, why not dream of achieving both? Owners and chairmen, they'll always want the Champions League because of the financial rewards that come with that. But I just feel you can't replicate that feeling of winning a trophy, can you? It's a lasting memory, something that will be cherished forever, for as long as you live. That will always go down and be remembered in your club's existence, in your club's history. Finishing 4th or 5th in the league table, it's nice, isn't it? But it's not something that people are going to remember in 10 or 15 years. Wigan Athletic, they won the FA Cup and they went down in the same season, so it's a bittersweet for Roberto Martinez at the time, but no one can ever take that FA Cup away from them, and that still gets talked about today, and it'll still get talked about in 20 years, in 30 years, 40 years. But as I said, why does it have to be one or the other? Brighton and Fulham will both be thinking now, why not both? And if Champions League is ultimately a step too far, then the Europa League or Europa Conference League are certainly in sight. And that would be a more than satisfactory consolation. And potentially the outcome of the game on the weekend could have a massive impact on that. What's also interesting about the weekend's game is that Brighton have never beaten Fulham in the Premier League, which is very curious, isn't it? As they've beaten pretty much everyone else at one point or another. And they were always a threat to some of the top sides. They've already proven that this season. It just happens, doesn't it? There's no logical explanation for it. All clubs have their bogey sides, and it appears that Fulham are Brighton's. Despite their recent form, Brighton fans will go into the game fearing the worst because of past meetings and that record that they can't seem to get one over on Fulham. But look, on the pitch, that should be forgotten about, shouldn't it? Once the whistle blows, I don't think if Danny Welbeck has a chance inside the box, he's thinking, oh, I got to score here because we've never beaten Fulham, and if I miss this, we might still never beat Fulham. So I think that goes out the window, but it's always something I think more for fans to cling on to, isn't it? Marco Silva's not giving his speech in the dressing room 10 minutes before the game saying, lads, it's Brighton, isn't it? We can't lose today, can we? He's going to fire his team up as if they're playing a side that they've lost 10 times in a row against, and it will be a difficult game given the form that Brighton have been in. But Fulham have shown this season against some of the teams that have been in form, some of the teams ahead of them, that they're a lot better than when they're having to play against teams lower down in the table, and there is more of an onus and expectation on them to go out and get the win. If you can recall the meeting earlier on in the season, it was on a cold December night at Craven Cottage, and Fulham won the game 3-1 with 2 goals from Alex Iwobi. If you can remember, he also played in a slightly different position. We're used to seeing him play on the left wing, but such is his versatility that I keep mentioning, that he can operate in different positions. And I think Fulham had a bit of a crisis coming into that game in terms of midfield. They were lacking certain options. So Alex Iwobi had to fill a hole in that game. He dropped back into midfield, and I think people were wondering how's that going to affect his game, how's that going to affect his attacking influence on proceedings. Well, it didn't have any effect at all because he scored 2 goals, didn't he? And I might come back to that, I might revisit that a bit later on and see if that could be something that Fulham look at on the weekend. Before I move on, there are just a couple of bits of news items I can bring to you. The first of those surrounds the FA Cup. We know Fulham drawn at home to Crystal Palace in the quarterfinals. We now have a date set for that. That'll be on the 29th of March. It'll be 12:15 p.m. kickoff, so it's the first of the 4 quarterfinals. Positive news about that is the ticket prices have been lowered. We've certainly seen protests recently. There's been a lot of backlash and complaints about the price of tickets for Fulham home games. So it's nice to see that they have responded in the best possible way, which is to lower the ticket prices, make it more reasonable. And I think Marco Silva said he wants to recreate that atmosphere, generate that atmosphere that they had in that semi-final second leg against Liverpool last season. So the best possible way to do that is make tickets more accessible for the fans. And a London derby, a massive game, big stakes, that should go a long way to doing that. The final bit of news before we move on to Brighton is that Marco Silva has been nominated for the Manager of the Month for 3 wins out of 4 in February. He's up against Glasner, Moyes, Postecoglou and Slot. Don't think he'll get it. My hunch tells me that he'll go to Arne Slot for his unbeaten month in February and pretty much sewing up the title for Liverpool. Is it something that managers really care about, to be honest? I don't think they lose sleep whether they win it or not. It's probably nice to have it because it means you've been recognised for your achievements, and it also illustrates what a good month Fulham have had after a bit of an indifferent January where results were a bit up and down, maybe not to the liking of Marco Silva. So it's a recognition of that. It's a recognition of him as a manager and the work he continues to do at Fulham. Probably best not to win it because I don't know if it still exists. Is it the manager's curse? It used to be a thing. Maybe it's not such of a thing anymore. But hey, as I said, it's nice to receive that recognition regardless. In the next part, I will be turning my attention and focus to the Seagulls. But before then, just a word or two about our sponsors. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. Let's talk Brighton then, and no doubt confidence will be high in the camp after that result last weekend, defeating Newcastle in the FA Cup. And just like Fulham, they'll see the FA Cup as an opportunity for them to lift silverware. They have a home tie in the next round, pits them against Nottingham Forest. Good draw for both sides, you would say. It's a 50-50 affair, much like Fulham's tie against Crystal Palace. But just like Fulham, they've had limited success in that competition. Just the one final in 1982-83, so there are parallels there. And you feel like since then, they wouldn't have had a better chance to win the FA Cup or win any trophy since then. So it is exciting on that front. They are in with a realistic chance of winning the FA Cup. And of course, we know they have aspirations of finishing in Europe as well. And they'll also be boosted by their form in the league recently as well. They've won their last 3, scoring 9 and conceding 1 in the process. And another important factor in those wins is how they've come against opposition for European contention, the likes of Chelsea and Bournemouth. So it's not just the 3 points that it gives yourselves, but it's the 3 points it takes away from the opposition as well, from stealing a march, gaining a march on you. And this is all on the back of that 7-0 humiliation to Nottingham Forest, which could prove to be a watershed moment in their season, the moment that ultimately turned their season around. I saw a lot of reactionary comments and stuff said after that defeat, questioning the team, questioning the manager, which is crazy to think, really. It almost shows how Brighton have become a victim of their own success and the expectations that raises with the seasons they've had recently, how they now see themselves as a team that should be fighting for Europe every season. But they've responded in the best possible manner to that defeat, and results like that can go one of two ways, can't they? It's such an embarrassment that it knocks your confidence and you lose belief in what you're doing, and you can spiral out of control. But on the other side, it can create a siege mentality, and after suffering defeat like that, you're determined to never let that happen again. And I think that's what Danny Welbeck said. He's been on record as saying recently, I'll pick up a quote on what he said after that defeat, basically, which was, it was a horrible, horrible result. In that dressing room, we all felt it. It was a moment when I wanted to let everybody know, remember this feeling? I wanted everyone to remember this feeling, and we never want to feel this way again. And that's where having strong characters and experience in the dressing room can count for a lot. Even more so when you've got an inexperienced manager who's quite young, younger than some of the first team players. So the likes of Danny Welbeck and probably James Milner, though James Milner hasn't played so many games this season, it's important to have those voices in the dressing room to just rally around some of the younger players. Probably would have knocked their confidence. So whilst you do want to quickly forget about something like that, put it to the back of your mind, start fresh, focus on the next game. Sometimes it's not the worst thing to just be reminded of something like that, because you don't want to experience that pain and humiliation again, do you? I feel like Brighton is such a well-run football club, aren't they? Potter leaves, De Zerbi comes in. De Zerbi leaves and then Hertzler comes in. It's just a smooth process, isn't it? There's no upheaval, there's no outside noise, the principles are still in place, the style's very similar, it's possession-based football, and it works. It suits the players they have. There's no doubt before the ball was kicked this season, many Brighton fans, many fans in general wouldn't have known Fabian Hertzler and would have been questioning that appointment. A lot of people on the outside with the lack of experience. Whilst experience is good in some respects, it's not the be-all and end-all, and he's proven that he's gone in to a club that's doing well, and it's just been the continuation of that process, and we could see a very fruitful season from Brighton. I feel like they are almost greater than the sum of their parts. They don't have many what you would call star players. You're probably looking at Matoma and possibly Belieber in time, but they're kind of where you expect them to be, which is also a credit to them at this stage. They are the blueprint for all teams that come up from the Championship, which is a couple of seasons where they're kind of loitering around the relegation, but survive comfortably, and they progress from that point on, and they finished in the last few seasons 9th, 6th and 11th, and are currently sitting 8th now. And let's not forget, in that 11th place finish, they were also combining the demands of Europe as well, which is something most Brighton players wouldn't have experienced, wouldn't have been used to. So they are that established Premier League force now, and I guess now it's just taking it to the next level, seeing where that next level gets you, and they want to be competing for Europe on a regular basis. They had a taste of it last season. They don't want that to be the only taste they have for a long time. They want more of it, and probably feel like they could and maybe should have gone further last season, and want to get back there so that they can prove what a force they can be in Europe. And I talk about Belieber because it ties in with what they've done previously, which is signing players who aren't necessarily household names, and then developing them, nurturing them into top players, which sees them go on elsewhere. They make a big profit out of that. You're talking the likes of Caicedo and Bissouma, McAllister, Cucurella. All have generated big fees, big sums of money for them. And from a business perspective, it's great because of the profit made. But you just wonder, at this stage where they are that established force. They are pushing top half Premier League every season. You wonder at this stage now whether they need to sell their best players. The grass isn't necessarily always greener on the other side. And they need to maybe look at things now. How do we progress? How do we better ourselves as a football club? First thing maybe we can do is not necessarily look to sell our prized assets, keep hold of them, build a squad of players, build a group of players, hard-working players, but talented at the same time, that can put some noses out of joint as far as the so-called bigger sides and that top echelon are concerned. From an outside perspective, I've been really impressed with the work that's gone on at Brighton in the last few seasons, and it just seems to be that smooth process, doesn't it? One manager goes, the other manager comes in, and without a fuss, without kicking up a stink, they carry on where they've left off. And as I said, they're almost role models for other sides looking to make that same step, or other sides looking to establish themselves in the Premier League. They can look no further than what Brighton have done and maybe try and follow that blueprint. So there we have it. There's a look at Brighton. I've spoken very glowingly, very positively about them, haven't I? In the final part, I will address some team news and offer up some insights as to how I think this game might go.
Your body is unique, and Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bionique, the world's most personalised supplements. Bionique provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN 2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bionique. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
Brighton do carry with them a pretty formidable home record into this game. They'll obviously be buoyed by the recent 2 victories at home against Chelsea and Bournemouth. If Fulham are to win at the Amex, then they'll do something that no other side in the top half has done this season. Brighton's only defeats at home coming to Crystal Palace, which would no doubt hurt them a lot. And the other one was Everton. I think what's interesting to note from the last couple of wins at home is how they've won those games against Chelsea and Bournemouth despite having less possession. So it just shows it's not how much of the ball you have, it's what you do with the ball. And at times Brighton have received criticism in the past because they've had lots of the ball, they've had a lot of possession, but not necessarily profited from it. We've seen how they rank high up in XG, but not necessarily able to use that effectively, whereas maybe we're seeing recently a different side to them where they can be effective without the ball just as well as they are with it. They tend to play with 4 at the back, but they can be flexible. Well, I'd imagine they go into this game with 4 at the back. There are some doubts about their fullbacks. We know that Tariq Lamptey's out after that red card against Newcastle. There is some doubt about Joel Veltman's availability as well, so that could see Hinchelwood deputising at right back. He's a very versatile utility sort of player. He can play anywhere, can't he, from what I've seen of Brighton. There is also a doubt about Caro Mitoma's fitness. I think he's got a bit of a knee injury. So given the form he's shown in recent weeks and the talent he possesses, there's no doubt Fulham fans and Timothy Castagne in particular will be hoping that he doesn't play, especially after that goal he scored against Chelsea, which was an exquisite take. Fulham would be buoyed if he's not on the team sheet. If we come on to Fulham, there are some doubts about Adama Traore. Marco Silva, in the press conference before the game, he said that they will make a decision after the next trainer session. Adama came off in a tie at Old Trafford with what was believed to be a twisted ankle. So hopefully he can pull through that trainer session okay and be fit enough to take his place, if not in the starting 11, then certainly in the squad. We know that Sasa Lukic is out for the next 2 games. He'll miss this game as well as the game against Spurs next week. But he missed the game earlier on in the season against Brighton as well, didn't he? And Fulham were able to come out winners in that. So they'll be hoping for the same again. I think with that suspension, whilst it is a blow to lose Sasa Lukic, I also think it's kind of a weight's been lifted, the fact that he has got suspended now, because it was always something that was lingering. He seemed to be on that 9th booking for a long period of time. So the fact that he has got his 10th booking is ticked over now, he's going to serve his 2-game ban. You're not dwelling on it now. You're not worrying about it. Obviously, you'd rather have him than not, but it was something that was inevitable. So, you'll miss the next 2 games and then you'll be back in the squad. And hopefully you shouldn't have to worry about any more suspensions for the rest of the season then. If Adama Traore isn't fit, if he can't overcome that ankle problem, then what are Fulham's options? Well, I spoke about Iwobi, didn't I? And the position he was deployed in that game against Brighton. With Sasa Lukic being out, I wouldn't be against him dropping back into that position, given the fact that it worked so well in the corresponding fixture in December. However, I would only do that if Adama Traore is fit. I think it's more of a risk if Adama Traore isn't fit, with Fulham's lack of options out wide, to then be putting a winger, one of your few fit wingers, into that position when you do have other options available to you. If Adama Traore is fit, then I would drop Iwobi into that midfield, and I would like to see Ryan Sessegnon given a chance. We saw him play wing back in the win against Wolves, and he was very impressive there. Took his goal really well, and there is a difference, of course, between playing left back, between playing left wing back, and between playing left wing. But he has played in all those positions, and I think his best position for Fulham probably came as a left winger, where he scored quite a number of goals in that Championship campaign. I always said with Ryan Sessegnon when he did sign, I thought he was probably not going to play much of a part in the first half of the season, but then he'll be pushing for the second half of the season, and he certainly put his name in the hat now. And even coming off the bench the other day at Old Trafford, he played on the right wing, which is a position we're not familiar, we're not used to seeing him playing in. So I'm sure Ryan Sessegnon will be happy to be playing, will be happy to get minutes wherever he's asked to play, and I wouldn't be against starting him in this game, but as I said, it depends on Adama Traore's fitness. If Adama Traore isn't available, then I would keep Iwobi out wide, and I probably would still play Sessegnon, but I would have Iwobi on the right. I think Willian is probably still not at that stage where he's ready to start games, is he? Otherwise, that would be the obvious replacement. We saw Emile Smith-Rowe come on and do a job on the weekend. The other option, looking at midfield, is potentially to play something similar to what we saw at the start of the season, which worked well at times, but in other games less so, which would be to play Sander Berger and then dual eights in Smith-Rowe and Pereira. There are options for Marco Silva. We'll see which way he goes with that. We know Brighton are a very good side, and they do like to play that possession-based football, but sometimes it can work against them. We saw that earlier in the season with Verbruggen, and we've seen a number of times this season how he's made mistakes. Sometimes just giving the ball away, and another time in the FA Cup recently where he just chucked one in his own net. So I feel like he is a bit of a weakness for Brighton, a bit of a liability at times, and people will probably come back at you and say he is a good shot stopper. Well, he wasn't on that occasion where he chucked it in his own net. And I feel like I'm going to go all Roy Keane here, but I feel like it is a prerequisite for a goalkeeper to be a good shot stopper. It's their job. I mean, come on, that's what they're paid to do. What I want from my goalkeeper is to keep it out of the net and be able to be good with their hands, but I also want them to do the fundamentals. Right? I always get nervous, I always hold my breath when I see goalkeepers doing Cruyff turns in the 6-yard box, because I think that's not what you're paid to do. That's why you're in goals. As much as it's nice to have the distribution of Ederson, I want my goalkeeper to be able to keep the ball out of the net first and foremost. I'm not really bothered about whether they can start attacks. If they can, it's a bonus, but I just feel that at times he's been a bit of a liability. Maybe Fulham can prey on that and pressure him, knowing what happened in the game earlier on in the season at Craven Cottage. How do I see this game going? Well, last week I decided not to give a prediction, and let's be fair, I mean, I couldn't have predicted Fulham to win 4-3 on penalties, could I? So I think I did the right thing in that situation. My prediction for this game is I think Fulham will score. They generally score away from home, just that one blank on the opening day. We know Brighton, we know how they like to set up, how they like to play. So I see both teams scoring, but I see this finishing in a draw. I see it finishing in a 1-1 draw, which will keep both sides where they are, depending on other results, of course. But I don't think it would necessarily be a bad result for either side. I think Fulham would certainly be happy-ish with a draw, whilst their away form has been good and they've been used to winning games away from home. I think if you go to Brighton knowing their home form, knowing the fact that they've lost only 2, okay, Brighton fans will be thinking there's too many draws in there. If we had converted those draws into wins, then we'd be higher up in the table than we are currently. But I think a draw away from home is a satisfactory enough result, and then it still keeps you in the hunt, doesn't it, then, for European places. As I said earlier on, if you were to suffer back-to-back defeats at this stage of the season, then that could be damaging with games soon to run out. But a draw away from the Amex, I think, is a reasonable enough result. The other thing I didn't mention about potential team use is the striker position, which I guess is open to debate at the minute, which way you see it, whether you think it should be Jimenez or Rodrigo Munez. I would stick with Rodrigo Munez. Okay, he didn't necessarily have a massive impact against Manchester United, but he did have an assist. He had an assist for Calvin Bassey's goal, and he had a brilliant game against Wolves. So I would like to see him given a run now. And, you know, if things don't work out, if he doesn't have a great performance, then you have the option of Raul Jimenez off the bench that can potentially make a difference. Either way they go, whether it's Raul Jimenez, whether it's Rodrigo Munez, it doesn't really matter. It's not something you're going to be up in arms about. But if it was me making that decision, I would like to see Rodrigo Munez keep his place in the starting 11. That'll do it for today's episode, for today's preview. A look ahead to the weekend's game as Fulham go to the seaside to take on Brighton. Thank you all once again for listening. Hope you all have a great weekend, and tune in next time on Monday, where I will recap all of the key events, all of the major talking points from the game at the Amex. Catch you all for that.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.